So my presentation is on structures of constitutional rhetoric, analysis, conservative manifestos from Major to Johnson. So the research questions that that have driven this piece of research, I analysed 8 conservative manifestos from 1992 election up to 2019. They were research questions: how was the Conservative Party structured their constitutional positions and policies in their manifestos, John Major to Boris Johnson? And the second question was, how were these constitutional positions expressed within the manifestos? Before moving on to that, some context. So since the 1970s in particular, we've seen 3 waves of constitutional change. Broadly speaking, we can see this as a European wave, from joining the European Union to withdrawing from it. The Labour years of 1997-2010, which was being seen as the largest constitutional changes in our constitution for many a year. The coalition and the Conservative government since then, from 2010 to the present day. So, for example, the Labour years, we've got the Human Rights Act, the House of Lords Act 1999, Constitutional Reform and Governments Act, putting the civil service on a statutory basis, the Constitutional Reform Act, creating the Supreme Court. During the coalition, we've got the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, referendum on AV, Scottish independence referendum, 2 House of Lords Acts, evil, and then Conservative government, more devolution acts in Scotland, 2012, 2016, Wales as well, prorogation, and all the Brexit legislation. So that's the backdrop of what's going on from this time period. Why manifestos then? Well, manifestos are, according to Norris et al., are the fullest official statement of each party's proposals. So if you want to know what their policies are, manifestos are a good place to start. And Budge also writes, their textual emphasis set the tone of and themes of campaigns and campaign discussion. They're not widely read by members of the public, but they are disseminated through the media to the public. And it's a way that party leaders wish to present themselves to the public. For example, John Major wrote in his autobiography about the 1992 manifesto that it was exactly how he wanted to present himself. It was, every word was exactly what he wanted, even though he didn't write a word of the manifesto. So even though he was not writing it, it still was a manifestation of what he wanted in particular. Right, next one. So preliminary findings. I used the Aristotelian triptych of pathos, ethos, and logos. And it was found that in this time period that the Conservative manifestos were essentially driven by pathos, emotive language of essentially dismissing the policies of their rivals, SNP, Labour, Liberal Democrat, for example, and also the Labour government in particular from that time period, Blair-Brown time period, using terms such as emotive terms such as vandalized, perverted, extremely damaging. For example, You Can Only Be Sure with the Conservatives manifesto, it states, in a world where people want security, nothing could be more dangerous than to unravel a constitution that binds our nations together. William Hague's 2001 Time for Common Sense manifesto writes, but after 4 years of Labour, the way we govern ourselves has been abused. We have an arrogant and complicit government which ignores Parliament and the people. strong emotive language. In 2010, under David Cameron, it writes, the manifesto states, Labour's constitutional vandalism has weakened Parliament, undermined democracy, and has brought the integrity of the ballot box into question. As you can see, this is not a sort of logical step-by-step, the minutiae of constitutional policy. This is emotive driven with emotive language. 2, there was no, during these manifestos, there was no consistent macro level usage of terms or headings within the manifesto where to elucidate the policies. As you can see here, there's been a United Kingdom, the Constitution, a proud democracy, accountability, change politics, stronger together, a union for the 21st century, home of democracy and the rule of law, and protect our democracy. So there's not been a standard place or a standard term to where to put the constitutional policies in one section. There has been 2 broad themes you can see here, a United Kingdom and a union, and the emphasis has been on devolution and the United Kingdom as one political unit, and also democracy. There's this theme of democracy, a proud democracy, home of democracy, protect our democracy. This term coming out again and again, this term democracy. So that moves me on to the 3rd finding, that the constitutional rhetoric, especially since John Major's 2nd manifesto in 1997, you can only be sure with the Conservatives, there's been a marked change in constitutional rhetoric, moving away from the more conventional constitutional rhetoric as constitution and parliament to an all-encompassing terms such as democracy in particular, with one exception of David Cameron's 2010 manifesto, which utilised politics as the all-encompassing term, but again, moving away from the constitutional rhetoric of constitution, parliament, and these sort of these terms. A good example of this is the 2017 manifesto, Forward Together, by under Theresa May. I quote, collective faith in our democratic institutions and our justice system has declined in the past 2 decades. It is the purpose of this Conservative Party, in responding to the historic vote on membership of the European Union, to re-establish faith in our democracy and in our democratic and legal institutions. Again, democracy, democratic being used, no word of the Constitution or Parliament in that statement, even though implicitly it's obviously referring to our Constitution and the Parliament in its place. So a conclusion is that utilisation of rhetoric can illustrate a way of thinking, the way that we speak can illustrate a way of thinking about our Constitution, our political system. What is legitimate, what is not legitimate within it. The move to catch all phrases such as democracy could lead to, and may have led to, poorly formed constitutional policies and legislation. It can also undermine checks and balances within the political system. If you are only referring to the term democracy, and it can undermine political, let's say, aspects of the Constitution that the Conservative Party has been close to or supporting in particular. There are limitations to my study, of course. Stubbsate manifestos, the Welsh and Scottish manifestos, have not been included in this study. Perhaps if I did include them, it could have shown perhaps the same move, or it may not have, but that's a limitation, and perhaps it could be an avenue for further research. And also this question, are manifestos a natural discrete documents mentally written for the political context of the day, or do they represent conservative thought on a particular process over time? And as you can see, I've taken more of the latter view, that they are. But the 2010 manifesto, David Cameron's, an interviewee said to me during this research, you can only understand fully the 2010 manifesto if you know about the expensive scandal in 2009 and you understand Steve Hilton. So the person who's writing it and the political context had an impact on the type of manifesto written by the Conservative Party in 2010. Brings to another limitation, perhaps, or may not be a limitation, but different people are writing the manifesto. It's not the same person writing the manifesto. There's, on the whole, there's not one person writing the manifesto either. Multiple people over time and input. So am I putting too much an emphasis on the change of vocabulary and rhetoric because different people are writing it, and we should expect that there will be different viewpoints and different way of writing? So this could be a potential limitation for my research. The one aspect that I wanted to dwell on is also about the pathos, is that the Conservatives have seen, according to recent research such as Hickson's book on the Conservative Right, and also Wheatcroft in 2005, The Death of Tory England, they argue that constitutional changes are bigger than, let's say, economic changes, because they are particularly damaging. This is what they conservatives, and especially conservatives on the Conservative Right, argue, that constitutional changes are particularly damaging. So it's appropriate, in their view, they would argue, to use emotive language because it's extremely dangerous. It needs to motivate the electorate to understand why it is so particularly damaging. Also, it provides difficulty for conservative thought. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, Dan. Very timely.